Hello friends, this is Sanjay. In this video, we'll discuss about the connection between language and thought, which is part of the Karnataka TET CDP syllabus for paper 1 and paper 2. As usual, in this series, we will cover only those topics which are important from your exam point of view. We'll start with the question, what is language? We'll look at the connection between language and thought. We'll look at nativist, learning and interactionist theories of language development. We'll study what are the factors that influence the development of language and the stages of language development. We will also touch upon some important theories such as Piaget, Vygotsky, B.F. Skinner, Noam Chomsky and Bandura's theories. We will also do a quick comparison between Vygotsky and Piaget's theories, and we will end this video with some sample questions from previous question papers. So let's get started. Let us start with answering a very basic question. What is a language? So language is a system of sounds and writing that human beings use to express their thoughts, ideas and feelings. Let's look at some of the parts of a language. We'll start with alphabets. Alphabets are very simple sounds like A, B, C. If we combine some of these alphabets, we get phonemes. Phonemes are sounds without meanings. For example, if we combine the alphabets C and H, we get ch. If we combine two R's, we get r. If we combine U and N, we get an. Graphemes are nothing but phonemes in written form. If you just speak them, if you make a sound, they become phonemes. If you write them, they are graphemes. If you combine two phonemes or two graphemes, then we'll get morphemes. Morphemes are single words with some meanings. For example, when we combine the phonemes r and an, we get run. Lexemes are forms of a word with the same root. For example, when we combine two phonemes r and an, when we make a morpheme, which is a word called run, then the lexemes of run can be run, ran and running. And now that we have seen how alphabets become words, then we'll look at punctuation. Punctuations are symbols that are used after the words. For example, if you put a question mark after the word run, we are asking somebody, are you going for a run? If we put an exclamation mark after run, then we are telling somebody that he or she should run. So it's a command. So that way, punctuations are symbols which provide some context to these words. Then there is grammar or morphology. So grammar or morphology is telling us what is this word. So is run a noun, or is run a verb, or is it an adjective? And then we come to syntax. That is, if we take these words and put them in a proper order using a proper syntax, then they become a sentence. For example, I want to run. That has some meaning. But if I shuffle the words, it becomes I run to want. Even though we have used the same words, because there is no proper syntax, this sentence I run to want doesn't make any sense. So if we take these words, put them in a proper order using a proper syntax, they become a meaningful sentence. And then we come to semantics. Semantics is interpretation or context of these sentences. For example, if I tell somebody, you are so great, this is a simple sentence. However, I can say this sentence literally. When I'm praising somebody, you are so great. Or I can be sarcastic, you are so great. So that is a sarcastic way of interpreting the same sentence. So semantics provide us with a context on how to interpret this sentence. So these are the different parts of a language. Three more words that you should know are phonology, graphology and morphology. Phonology is nothing but the study of phonemes. Graphology is nothing but the study of graphemes. And morphology is nothing but the study of morphemes. So what is the importance of language? Well, language usually plays a very important part in most human activities. From our syllabus perspective, language plays a key part in the development of a child. Language is essential in the teaching and learning process. It helps us in basic communication and almost all social interactions. And language also plays a very key part in the development of thought and also in the thinking process itself. So, language and thought. What is the connection? There are many theories which try to explain this connection, and if you were to classify them and put them on a scale, on the extreme left, we'll find theories which strongly support the statement or the argument that thought determines language. And on the extreme right, we will have theories which state the opposite. That is, language determines thought. And everything else falls between these two. On the extreme left, we have the Universalist language theory, which says that language develops specifically to express thoughts. If we move a little towards the right, we have Piaget's theory, which says that thought influences language. And if we move a little further towards the right, we reach the center, and this is where Vygotsky's theory comes in, who says that thought and language are independent. They do develop in parallel and they do influence each other to a certain extent, but they are independent. And towards the right side, we have the linguistic determinism theories. It can be either weak or strong. The weak linguistic determinism theory says that language influences thought, whereas the strong linguistic determination theory says that language determines thought. Therefore, this is how various theories have tried to explain the connection between language and thought. When we look at the various language development theories, they can be broadly classified into three types: nativist, learning, and interactionist theories. The nativist theory says that children are born with the ability to acquire or learn languages. This is where Noam Chomsky's language acquisition device theory comes into play. Noam Chomsky says that children are born with a specific part of their brain designed to acquire or learn new languages very easily, which is why children can easily learn 1, 2, or multiple languages. That part of the brain becomes less effective as they grow up, which is why adults find it very difficult to acquire new languages. The learning theory says that children acquire or learn languages through reinforcement. An example is B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory. For example, if I say the word chocolate and give this sweet to a child, and I repeat the same action multiple times, the child starts to associate this sweet with the word chocolate. And later on, when the child wants a chocolate, he will say the word chocolate, and if I give him this sweet, then it confirms his thought that this particular word chocolate is associated with this sweet. This is how the child is learning a new word because of the reinforcement. Moving on to the interactionist theory, this is where Vygotsky's socio-cultural constructivist theory comes into place, because he says that children acquire or learn new languages through social interactions. So don't worry about all these three theories. We will cover them in detail in the next few slides. Let us take a quick look at the factors influencing the development of languages. Now, language development is influenced by the general health and the physical status of the child. It is affected by the intelligence and the cognitive development of the child. Motivation, learning, and maturation are also very important, especially motivation, because if the child is motivated to learn a new language due to any reason, then the child tends to learn that language very fast. Environment also plays a very important part, and sex of the child is also apparently important, because some of the research shows that female children tend to pick up languages quite faster or better than male children. And relationship with family members is also very important, because one of the first sources where children learn language is through their interaction with the family members. So the relationship with the immediate family members matters a lot. Then number of family members, because the more number of people children are interacting with, the better their language development. And bilingualism, because some research says that if children are exposed to multiple languages at home or outside when they are very young, then they tend to pick up languages very fast. So bilingualism is also a key factor in influencing the development of languages. Next, let us look at the stages of language development in children. The first stage starts even before birth, that is pre-birth, because at around the third semester, children still in the mother's womb are able to distinguish between their mother's voice and others. That is, they are able to recognize their mother's voice and react to it. 7 months after birth, children start babbling. That is, they start making sounds like pa, da, ba, a, u. And between the ages of 1 to 1.5 years, they start using one words. That is, amma, dada, didi. And between 1.5 to 2 years, they start using two words, such as give toy or doggy gone. And between 2 to 2.5 years, they start using telegraphic speech. Here, they are using sentences which might not be grammatically correct, but they convey some meaning. For example, I want play, call mommy now. Right? And 2.6 years and higher, this is called the after telegraphic phase. Here, children are using longer and much more complex sentences. So these are the stages of language development in children. Moving on to the theories of language development, the first theory that we will look at is Piaget's. Now Piaget's language development theory is integrated into his theory of cognitive development. Piaget says that thought comes first and language develops next to express these thoughts. So thought comes first, language comes next. If you look at Piaget's cognitive development theory, he has divided development into 4 different stages. That is sensory motor stage, pre-operational, operational and formal operational stages. So language development is also integrated into these 4 stages. For example, in the sensory motor stage, that is birth to 2 years, he says that language skills are being developed through physical movement. That is, children are trying to mimic the sounds that they are hearing. So these sounds that they are trying to make is what will become language in the future. In the pre-operational stage, he says that language development is happening through a process of assimilation and accommodation, because the child is frequently finding himself or herself in new situations and having to learn new words. So assimilation and accommodation is happening here to help in the development of language. So what are these assimilation and accommodation all about? That I will explain in the next slide. Next, in the operational stage, that is from 7 to 12 years. So language becomes more logical and children are able to convey more concrete information or concrete facts. So children are becoming mature and they are able to use language much more effectively. And in the formal operational stage, that is 12 years plus, children are now almost at an adult level. So they are able to use language at a much higher level to communicate their thoughts. Therefore, Piaget's language development theory is integrated into his cognitive development theory. As I mentioned in the previous slide, Piaget says that in the pre-operational stage, language development is happening through a process of assimilation and accommodation. So what are these assimilation and accommodation? Let me explain with a small example. Now, there is a small child who is regularly playing cricket at home. So he's using only a bat and a ball, right? So he is in a state of equilibrium or equilibration. Next, one day he goes to a stadium and he sees some children playing cricket. They are using these 3 sticks which are behind the batsman. So he doesn't know what these new 3 sticks are all about. So he is in a new situation and he is experiencing disequilibrium because he is coming across some new things that he has not seen before. Right? Then he starts interacting with those children and he learns that these 3 sticks are also part of playing cricket. These are also used in the game. So he assimilates this new information into his existing schema. So he's assimilating this new information. And then he learns that these 3 sticks are called stumps. So he's accommodating some new words into his existing vocabulary. So now he knows what these sticks are and what they are used for. So he reaches a stage of equilibration. So this way, whenever children find themselves in a new situation, they go through a feeling of disequilibrium and they assimilate the new information that is being given to them into their existing schema, and they accommodate this new information, new words into their existing vocabulary, and then they reach a stage of equilibration. So this is Piaget's assimilation and accommodation. The next theory that we will talk about is Vygotsky's theory on the development of language in children. He says that language is both a tool and a means. So what does this mean? So he says that language is a way through which children are able to connect with the S and the C in his theory. That is, Vygotsky's cognitive development theory is built on the concepts of social factors, cultural factors, and language. So language is the means through which children can interact with the social factors and the cultural factors. So language is the means of interacting and connecting with S and C. And language is obviously the tool for communication, that is for sending and receiving information. And he also says that language is also the means through which children can process the information that they have received and convert it into knowledge. So to summarize, language is what is used to connect with social factors and cultural factors. Language is used for sending and receiving information. And language is also the means through which this information is processed by children and converted into knowledge. Next, he says that words are signals that are used by adults. And these signals represent some things and ideas. And these words are then learned by children. when the children are interacting with these adults. So that is how children learn words and children learn language. For example, when I show this animal to my child and tell her that this is a dog, and I keep repeating it once, twice, thrice, so she starts associating this word dog, which is a signal, with this animal. I do the same thing with a cow, so she starts associating the word with a cow, and this is a ball, this is a tree. So that is how my child is learning language through words, and she is learning to associate those words, which are essentially signals, with different things, animals, plants, and ideas. And then he also talks about the concept of inner speech. So, as we have discussed previously also, inner speech is nothing but the expression of thought in the form of language. When children are playing alone, they are usually talking to themselves. So this talk or this speech is not aimed at anybody else. The speech is being used for self-regulation and self-direction. They are just giving instructions to themselves, or they are just thinking out aloud. And he says that this inner speech is what connects thought and language, because inner speech is nothing but the expression of thought in the form of language. He says that inner speech helps the development of language. And Vygotsky says that language and thought both will start developing right from the time of birth, and at around the age of 2 years. That is when these two will come together and form private speech. And private speech becomes silent inner speech as the child grows older, because the child now is self-conscious and doesn't want others to hear his or her thoughts. So the private speech may continue for the rest of the person's life, just that it becomes silent inner speech. So this is Vygotsky's theory on the development of language in children. Next, let us look at B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory. So this operant conditioning theory is actually a theory of development which includes the development of languages as well. This is a fairly simple theory which I can explain using an example. There is a mother who feeds her child every day, and every time she is feeding her child, she says things like "Duddu piyega, mera bete ko duddu chahiye, duddu piyega." So she keeps repeating this word duddu in her normal talk. At this age, the child is learning to say things. He is mimicking some sounds that he is hearing. So he says things like ba, woo, and he also learns to say duddu. So once when he says duddu, his mother says, "Oh, mere bete ko bhook laga hai, duddu piyega." So she gives him a bottle of milk. The child starts associating that maybe this word duddu and the action of saying this word duddu means a bottle of milk. So the operant here is the word duddu and the action of saying duddu, and the consequence is that he gets a bottle of milk. So if this gets repeated multiple times, then that is reinforcement. So that's how the child starts to learn that this word duddu is associated with milk. And if the child says doggy and he gets a dog toy, so every time he says doggy, if the parents give him a dog toy, right? So he starts associating the word doggy with that particular toy. So that way children learn words, and whenever there is some operant, that is whenever they say some word and it leads to a specific consequence, they start associating this operant with that particular consequence. So the consequence can be a thing, or it can be an experience, or it can be an action. For example, if the child says out and the parents take him out, then he starts associating the word out with going outside. So Skinner says this is how children learn language. That is, they use some words and they realize that these words lead to some consequences, and that's how they start forming this association. And when that gets reinforced, they start learning it better and better. That is, that behavior gets confirmed. And operant is an overt behavior that operates to generate a significant consequence. So here the operant is saying these words and the consequence is the result. And learning is a function of overt change in overt behavior. That is, initially the child would say ba, and he says that he sees that nothing happens. He says woo, and he says that nothing happens, but he says duddu. Then he gets milk. So he is learning to change his behavior. He realizes that ba and woo don't lead to anything, so there is no point in saying them. I might as well just say duddu because that leads to some consequence. So his behavior is changing because of the consequence. And changes in behavior are the result of positive or negative response to stimuli. That is, if the child is crying and the mother says stop crying and then comes and gives him a beating, so he starts associating the words stop crying with beating. So he realizes that if he hears the word stop crying, then he should immediately stop doing whatever he is doing, because otherwise he'll get a beating. Right? So that way he is negatively responding to the stimuli being the words stop crying. And when any response is reinforced positively or negatively, the individual is conditioned. So this is B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory. Next, let us look at Noam Chomsky's language acquisition device theory. So Chomsky says that children are born with a predisposition or an ability to learn language. And LAD, that is the language acquisition device, is a hypothetical mental tool. That is, it is not a specific organ or a part of the brain. It is a general mental ability that helps children rapidly learn new languages. And this LAD stops being effective as children grow older, which is why adults find it very difficult to learn new languages, whereas children can very easily pick up 1, 2, or 3 new languages. And Chomsky says that LAD has evolved to make humans better at learning and understanding languages, because humans are capable of using very complex language and other animals are not. So that is because humans have this LAD at the beginning of their life, that is during their childhood. They have the language acquisition device which helps humans learn and understand language. And children across the world develop language in a similar way. That is, if you look at children across India, where so many different languages are used, or if you look at children in Europe, so where again many different languages are used. So irrespective of the language, children seem to develop language in a similar way, which seems to say that this language acquisition device is a part of the human brain. So irrespective of which language is being used or where the children are across the world, they seem to learn languages and develop languages in a similar way. And the concept of LAD has developed into the universal grammar theory. So what is this universal grammar theory? Well, again, there are so many different languages across the world. There are so many languages in India. There are so many languages in Europe. There are so many languages across Asia. But all languages seem to have similar structures and rules. That is, they seem to have very similar grammar. They seem to have concepts of verb and adjective and noun. So how did this happen? And this is probably because all humans have a LAD, that is the language acquisition device. And because all humans are developing languages through this language acquisition device, all languages have some sort of a universal grammar. And Chomsky also talks about this concept of generative grammar. That is, if you look at the native speakers of any language, they automatically seem to know how to use a proper grammar and syntax. For example, a child who is just now learning to use full sentences uses sentences in a correct way. For example, a child will say, I want to eat the apple, right? Because the child seems to know what is the correct syntax, what is the correct way to use these words. The child can use the apple to I want eat. Right? Now that wouldn't have made sense, and the child is not going to use a sentence in such a way. So how does the child know what is the proper way of using those words to convey a meaning? And that is probably because of this concept of generative grammar, where humans are generating the grammar in their own brain, which seems to be connected with the language acquisition device. So this is Noam Chomsky's LAD theory. The next theory that we will look at is Bandura's vicarious learning theory. So vicarious learning means that we are learning through somebody else. So Bandura proposes a social learning theory, and he talks about observational learning. He says that most human behavior is learned through observation, imitation, and modeling. More specifically, coming to language development, he says that children learn language by observing models around them. So what are these models? So models for any human being can be anything around them which they can observe and from which they can get some information. For example, a family can be a model for everyone, because we look at our family members, and a child looks at how the family members are speaking and learns language through the family members. And peers or classmate can be a model. The teacher and the classroom can also be a model. Media, the community, the religion to which the child is exposed to, and the sports which the child is playing. So all these are models from which children pick up language. And for an adult, even the office or the workplace is a model that we can observe, imitate, and learn something from. And Bandura also says that mere observation is not enough for learning, because the child also has to pay attention. And he or she has to retain what is being taught and has to be able to reproduce what has been taught, and there should be a motivation for all of the above. For example, a child goes to school and just by sitting in the classroom and observing the teacher, the child will not be able to learn everything. The child has to pay attention to what is being taught in class. And the child has to retain or remember what is being taught. And when required, in a practical or in an exam, the child has to be able to reproduce what has been taught. And to do all of this, there has to be some motivation. The motivation can be positive or negative. For example, if the child does well, he will get a reward from his parents and from the teacher. So that is positive motivation. If the child does not do well, he might get punished by the teacher or by the parents. So that is negative reinforcement or negative motivation. So this way, observation, when combined with all these mediational processes, leads to learning. Bandura also says that the child is more likely to imitate people it perceives as similar to itself. For example, same gender. Girls would like to imitate women or girls that they see, and boys are more likely to imitate men. If a boy thinks of himself as a good sportsman, then he might imitate other sportsmen. If a girl thinks she's a dancer or she wants to be a good dancer, then she might imitate other good dancers that she sees in the media. So that way, children are more likely to imitate people that they perceive are similar to themselves. And people around will respond to the imitation with either reinforcement or punishment. For example, the child thinks he is a gunda and he learns some bad languages from his friends, and he comes home and he uses that bad language in the family, and his parents immediately punish him. Then there is a punishment that is happening. So the child realizes that if he uses such language, then there will be punishment. So the child will stop using such language or avoid such language. And the child will come back from some function and is able to repeat some speech or say things in a particular way. He uses some language which leads to some praise by the family members. So he is getting positive reinforcement there. So the child realizes that if I do things in this way, if I repeat these or if I use a particular type of language, then people are happy, right? People are praising me. So that is positive reinforcement that leads to language development. So this way, both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement or punishment lead to development of language. And the child will also factor in what happens to others before imitating. And this is vicarious learning. That is, the child's brother comes home and talks in a particular way. He has learned something in school, which he repeats at home. So the child sees that the brother gets a reward for speaking things in a particular way or using a particular type of language. So the child will also try to imitate because he also wants to get the reward. This way, children look at others as well, and they are observing others and learning from them. So that is vicarious learning. So this is Bandura's theory of vicarious learning. Let us now do a quick comparison between what Vygotsky and Piaget say about the development of language. Vygotsky's theory says that language drives thought. That is, language is very, very important for the development of thought. Whereas Piaget's theory says that thought drives and precedes language. That is, thought comes first and language develops because this thought has to be expressed in some way, and that is done by language. Vygotsky's theory says that thought and language develop in parallel. Whereas Piaget's theory says that thought comes first and language develops for the specific reason of expressing that thought. And Vygotsky's theory, language is given a lot of importance because it is a very crucial part of his SCL. Because without language, you cannot have any social interactions and you cannot look at all the cultural factors. Therefore, language is the media through which children or people can have social interactions and can get influenced by cultural factors. Whereas in Piaget's theory, he says that the cognitive development is not highly dependent on language development. He says that cognitive development and language development are connected, but they don't influence each other to a large extent. And in Vygotsky's theory, he says that private speech is very, very essential because it is self-directed regulation and self-communication. Whereas Piaget says that private speech is just egocentric or immature, and he doesn't give it a lot of importance. So these are some of the important differences between Vygotsky's theory and Piaget's theory when it comes to the development of language. Now let us solve some sample questions from previous question papers. The first question is, which of the following is based on interactional theory of language learning? So what is this interactional theory? So any theory which says that language is learned through interactions, through social interactions, is an interactional theory. So look at all the options and see which one of them is talking about any kind of interaction. The third option says cooperative language learning. So cooperation is nothing but social interaction. Therefore, the correct answer for this question would be option 3. Noam Chomsky's theory is primarily related with which of the following? Very simple question. We have seen in this video that Noam Chomsky's theory is about language acquisition device. Therefore, the answer here is language development. What type of language theory focuses on the inborn capacity of infants to learn language? So in this video, we studied about 3 main types of language development theories, which are nativist, learning, and interactionist theories. And nativist theory says that children are born with the ability to acquire or learn languages, such as Noam Chomsky's language acquisition device theory. So here the correct answer is nativist theory. Who strongly maintains that language is learned by imitation of stimuli and reinforcement of correct responses? If you remember, we studied about Bandura's vicarious learning theory, and in which he says that most human behavior is learned through observation, imitation, and modeling. He also says that people around will respond to such imitation with either reinforcement or punishment. Therefore, the correct answer here is Albert Bandura. The theory that we are born with a language acquisition device was formulated by who among the following? Very simple question. The answer is Noam Chomsky, who formulated the LAD, or the language acquisition device theory. With that, we come to the end of this part. And if you have any questions or feedback, then you can put them in the comment section below. The rest, you know what to do. So I will see you soon in the next part of this video series. Till then, take care, stay safe.